they can do. And we begin with a discussion question. So our discussion question is, can you think of an example from your life of advice you first refused only to reconsider and actually follow it later on? And why the change? Surely people have been given advice that they didn't care to hear.
But then that we changed our minds on it.
I think there's probably a lot of diet and exercise advice you hear when you still feel pretty healthy. And then as you start to not feel as healthy, it doesn't matter if it's age or illness, then you start thinking, oh, maybe that's good advice after all. Maybe I don't know exactly what I'm talking about. Or financial advice too. People tell you to save for retirement when you're in your 20s. You think, come on, that's ridiculous.
I was given advice, but I was forced to reconsider it. Does that count?
Sure. So forced to reconsider rather than doing it by your own volition. Okay.
And I'm glad that I was forced to do it. When I graduated from high school, I had a school, and I didn't want to go to college. My father said, I don't feel like you do it, you're going to be trained to do something. So I thought being a beautician would be a good job. So I was all ready to go.
Sorry, Chris, did you say after high school you want to be a musician or magician?
Beautician.
Beautician. Okay, sorry.
I really wanted to be a mortician, but my father wouldn't want it. So anyway, I was all ready to go to beauty school, and my guidance counselor kept pushing me to go to this college. So long story short, I ended up going to this college because my father negotiated with me that if I went for one semester and didn't like it, I could quit, and he would still pay for me to go to beauty school. So it was sort of a win-win. I told you that they kept me into college semester by semester till the beginning of my junior year. And then my father said, what are you going to do with a half year of credits from a 4-year school? You're still not trained to do anything. And I'm glad he was firm about that. And but it was not a decision I would have made. It wasn't until I graduated and looked back on it that I thought, well, I'm glad he was forceful as he was.
So he kept getting you to go back semester by semester to school, and eventually.
Yeah, he would say, well, what do you? We were on trimester, so he'd go, well, what are you going to do with 3 credits in something? We can't even find a college that'll take that. Finally, I just gave in. It wasn't worth the fight any longer.
So advice with a little firm direction too that eventually you reconsider. That's a good example. Check our screen.
Chris or Joyce and Michelle, can you hear Chris?
Yes.
Michelle, you can hear me a little bit?
Yes. It's a little muffled.
Okay. I'm trying to adjust these microphones. You're okay.
Well, I'm trying to repeat things, so hopefully you can hear me a little bit, at least to understand the content, but I'll try and repeat a little bit of the story as you hear it, but personal sharing time is going to be a little bit different than our answer. So we're going to move into the study part, and welcome Diane. Hopefully you have a sheet there in front of you. We're going to look into the context of the passage that we're about to read. So we're going to be reading from Matthew 21, which is one of the most action-packed chapters of the Bible. I know you can say that about a lot of chapters, but this one has Palm Sunday, the cursing of a fig tree, and about 4 parables. And the cleansing of the temple, all in one chapter. So there's just all kinds of stuff going in as Jesus kind of enters Jerusalem here. So we're going to look at the context before we get to the actual passage, and we start by reading the passage that comes before our focus, which relies on a passage from the Old Testament. So we're going to kind of follow this string here. And I'll start by reading Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 13, which is in the printed material. And it says, this is the prophecy, God speaking. When I wanted to gather them, says the Lord, there are no grapes on the vine or figs on the fig tree, even the leaves are withered, and what I gave them has passed away from me. This kind of sets us up for the scene. Now we're going to read what precedes our passage just before, because it will help us understand our passage. So we get to Matthew chapter 21, and we'll read verse 18 through 22. And normally I would ask for volunteers, so I'm going to do that because I would hope that Joyce and Michelle have a Bible they can read along, so even if you can't hear what's happening, you can at least read along in your Bible. So is there a volunteer who would read verses 18 to 22 for us? Great, thank you.
Early in the morning, as he was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." And immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" they asked. And Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but you can also say to this mountain, 'Go, throw yourself into the sea,' and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer."
So how is this passage an enacted form of the prophecy of Jeremiah? What, or better, who does the fig tree represent? So for a long time, people have been really not happy with Jesus for killing a tree. This is not, people get a little, a little unnerved by this. Why did Jesus kill this tree? So how is this an enacted form of the prophecy of Jeremiah that is in the question here? And what, or better, who does the fig tree represent? Now again, I went really briefly, but at the beginning of this passage, the Palm Sunday story happens, and then the cleansing of the temple.
So is the fig tree somehow representative of our ultimate judgment?
Is it a representation of our ultimate judgment? Could be, yes. And specifically to a pointed group. So some folks have said, oh, it's the Jewish people. It's not all of the Jewish people. It's the people in leadership. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the chief priests, the elders, and all that. It's the people who are supposed to be bearing fruit, which all of us do. But in particular, like when he cleansed the temple, he wasn't mad at every Jewish person. He was mad that people who were poor and coming to the temple were getting gouged. And all of a sudden their faith wasn't enough. They had to have faith in money. So part of that Palm Sunday, cleansing the temple, arriving in Jerusalem, the powers that be really don't want Jesus there because he has something to say that they do not want to hear. It's going to upset the apple cart, right? So the fig tree, this prophecy of Jeremiah, is Jeremiah speaking to the leaders of Israel, saying, God's going to come for the harvest, and God's going to find nothing. And all the figs that were supposed to be produced, nothing's there. All the grapes that were supposed to be on the vine, nothing's there. So this is kind of the enacted prophecy of Jeremiah, is this cursing of the fig tree in some ways. And so what's wrong with it? Because it doesn't have fruit. Fig tree is supposed to have fruit. Now some people have said, well, around the time Jesus came, if it was 2 weeks before the Passover, and tree has no right to have fruit at that time of year, and that's not the point. Right? So, that's what gets you to say, Jesus just killed the tree that had no right to bear fruit. That's like, yes, this is true. It's an enacted prophecy. It's not, we need to back up a little bit from like finding the season of the year and whether or not the tree had fruit or not. It's to try and get the meaning behind it, right? So what's the point of adding verses 21 and 22 as a teaching moment? And what are the two keys to following Jesus or following God according to this part?
I guess just believe and have faith in Jesus and us in God that all things are possible.
Well,
Strongly enough.
faith and belief as one of them, that all things are possible. He says, if I tell the mountain to throw in the sea, So faith is number one, or belief. They're parallel depending on your translation. You might have one or the other.
Maybe the triumph over huge obstacles gives you a thought for the future when most of your disciples university.
So triumphing over obstacles kind of is a prediction of the future where the disciples would have to overcome persecution. This is true. That goes with faith and belief, perhaps.
It also says that you have to ask for it in prayer. So,
Ask for it in prayer.
so to me, what that means is that it's an internal action as opposed to driving the money changers out of the temple, which is more external. That it's up to you. You have to do something as an individual.
So it's the faith and prayer part, which speaks to an internal, not driving the money changers out of the temple. That's a very external thing. This talks about an internal way of being, to have faith or belief with prayer. So that last part of verse 22, whatever you ask for in prayer with faith, you will receive. So we understand that Jesus isn't talking about win the lottery, please God, let me win the lottery. We're talking about more kind of, a faithful prayer with kind of eternal consequences. Jesus is saying you will receive that. Yes, sir.
And I think, for me, it also says of the power of the individual.
The power of the individual.
That you as an individual have a lot of power to make go to God in prayer for changes to occur. It isn't necessarily always a group action.
So it can be an individual that starts the prayer revolution, we'll say. That's not exactly your words, but that it doesn't have to be a group, that each of us are empowered with that faith and prayer to go to God, right? This is going to lead into the bigger, grander point later on, Chris. So that's a great perspective about the individual power that we have.
And from what he's saying through faith and prayer, the individual power can do very large things.
The individual power can do big things with faith and prayer.
Yes, and to add to that, you do it by laying hold on God. That individual power you get through the prayer, you laying hold on God.
You accomplish it by laying hold of God.
Embracing God.
By embracing God. So the individual power with faith and prayer is massive to accomplish things that seem unreasonable when you direct that to embracing God. When you direct your faith, direct your prayer to embracing God. Anna.
Praying to God about having the strength to produce fruit.
the strength that you have and the ability to produce fruit then through that as well. Very good. So we have a little context with this fig tree. And the teaching moment at the end, which cannot be divorced from the fig tree episode, which then is nothing about a tree at all, but about faith and prayer being the keys to following Jesus or following God more broadly. And so we take that with us as we enter into our passage this morning. So we're going to read the first part of this passage, verse 23 through 27. Is there a volunteer who'd like to be willing to read that as we also read along wherever we are?
I can read.
Thank you, Marcy.
When he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" Jesus said to them, "I will also ask you one question. If you tell me the answer, then I will also tell you by what authority I do these things. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin?" And they argued with one another. "If we say from heaven, he will say to us, 'Why then did you not believe him?' But if we say of human origin, we are afraid of the crowd, for all regard John as a prophet." So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things."
So we have a good trap for Jesus that, unfortunately for those elders and priests, Jesus doesn't fall into their trap and instead resets it for them, which, before we even get into our questions, we understand they came out looking really bad. So my opening question of this particular part, and this particular question I'm fishing for a right answer, I'll just let you all know right now. What do the chief priests and elders represent? And you might consider what we've just talked about. They're the fig tree.
Are they figs?
They're the fig tree, really. The ones that should be producing fruit and don't seem to be. They're the ones that are in the power to get things moving and instead seem to be holding it back. Right? So what trap are they trying to set for Jesus? What are the questions they're asking him? Why are they, what are the implications if Jesus answers this question one of the ways they want him to? Because they're fine with him answering either way. Either way, he can seal his doom in some way. So what are the implications if he answers in either way that they're looking at?
They want to say that he's God. And that would be blasphemy.
They want him to say that he's God?
God
So if he says his authority is from God,
yeah.
he's blaspheming.
Yeah.
Because he's saying that he's divine, right? What about the alternative?
If he's saying he's for men, then he has no authority.
If he says that his power is for men, he's just saying, I'm popular. And once his popularity wanes, he doesn't matter anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at that. The triumphal entry, the cleansing of the temple, the fig tree, all these things are happening, and I think they're trying to undermine Jesus.
So they're either saying you're a flash in the pan or you're a blasphemer. So which is, you have one of two choices, which is a door number one or door number two, Jesus. And Jesus sees that there's no way to answer that correctly because he already knows that they're out to get him. The Jerusalem, entry into Jerusalem as the crowd is shouting and they're plotting. He already understands why he came to Jerusalem. He knows he's on his way to his death, but he's not going to hasten it. He's not going to let them have the fodder for it. He's going to make them make the decision and make them stand out there. So, what are they trying to establish over Jesus, essentially? This is the big picture here.
A reason to crucify him?
A reason to crucify him, yeah. So if you're able to crucify somebody in those days, what do you have over that person? Authority or power. So this question is to establish that Jesus does not have authority and power over them, but that they have authority and power over him. Because either way he answers, they can either prosecute him for blaspheming, or they can say, see, we're the ones in charge and he's just popular. Either way, it establishes their authority and power over him, no matter how he answers this question. Or so they think. So how does Jesus respond? And why is his answer troublesome to them?
They won't tell them. They have no power over him. They can't force those words out that they want to hear out of his mouth. So he just takes the middle position. And now they don't know what to do.
So he won't answer them, so that's difficult in the first place. Michelle or Joyce, do either one of you have an answer on this one? How does Jesus respond to them, and why is that troublesome to them? I don't mean to put you on the spot, I just want to make sure that we're not ignoring it.
He sort of sets a trap for them in response.
So Michelle, what's the response and how is it a trap?
Because he brings up John that the people really loved and basically throws that question back on it. So if they, just like they said, like if they acknowledge John's power came from God, then he'll be able to question them as to why they didn't listen to what he was saying.
John's key message is that Jesus is the Christ. So if they say, yes, John's authority as a prophet came from God, then they have to also say, and what he said was true, which is that Jesus is the Messiah. If they say that John's authority came from man, they're denying that he was a prophet, which people say it's obvious that John was a prophet. So either they're going to say John was what he said he was, except Jesus we still don't believe in. So then you deny John's message. Or what people see the fruits of, they see the fruits of this prophecy among them, you deny that. Either way, Jesus has put the trap back on them. They don't have a right answer. That still enables them to have authority. And so the answer they give,
I mean, I will say though that it's encouraging to me to see leaders say, I don't know. There's something encouraging about, they're like, yeah, we don't know the answer. And in my experience, a lot of leaders don't say that. They want to say they know something. Like, they want to give the answer, but just for them to say, we don't know, that's like, that's encouraging to me.
This would be a great message to our leaders today if they were truthful in saying, I don't know, to allow leaders today to sometimes say, I don't know. Unfortunately, I think they know the consequences of their answers so much that they refuse to say it and then come up with the answer, I don't know, even though they have a very firm answer that they think that John was from man and not from God. I would agree with you, Marcy. It would be really if they said we don't know that answer. This is a self-serving I don't know. You're right, Pat. It's not, it just doesn't seem truthful to me.
It would be doing their job, in a sense, if they said, I don't know, but you help me. What are your thoughts on this? Why are you coming at us this way?
But they're the authorities, Ginny, so their job is to define where John comes from.
I know they are, but good authorities listen to other people.
Good authorities listen to other people, you're right. And at this point, I would argue they should have listened to other people so that they should have their answer ready to go. Because their authority is supposed to be to say, is that a true prophet or a false prophet? And when the people say, Is that a true prophet or a false prophet? They're supposed to be able to answer. Jesus, he's a false prophet. Okay, well, what about John? Oh, that's a tricky one. So, yes, you're right that this is, in some ways, it almost feels like it would be a good thing for them to say, I don't know. On the other hand, it seems to be a pretty loaded, I don't know, right? So what effect does their question have? Going back to what they're trying to establish over Jesus, what effect does this interaction have?
You really can't continue to criticize him for what he's doing because they're back on the
They continue to criticize what he's doing?
They can't.
They can't.
Yes, they're back on equal ground there.
They're back on equal ground. So they tried to establish authority and power over him. He showed them, as Chris, you were saying, with this faith and prayer thing, one person can have a big impact when they embrace God, as Ginny mentioned. Jesus showed you how the authorities can't have authority over me in this particular way. I'm not going to bow to their authority. And in fact, by his question, he kind of showed that he has authority over them, which is even worse. They were just trying to rubber stamp their authority, and instead now it's in serious question. The tables have certainly turned, and not just in the temple where the money changers were. Now the whole authority question.
So I have the Message version today, and it says they decided to concede that ground to Jesus.
They decided to concede that ground to Jesus. Well, in deciding to concede that ground to Jesus, they conceded everything to Jesus.
So that round.
That round. Oh, that round.
Which is a little different,
That was a crucial round. Yeah,
That's
I would say.
round one, ding ding.
Yeah.
What's the next
Well,
round?
he got us there. Well, yeah, he got you in the most important way. He didn't quibble over a particular interpretation of the law. He lost the who has authority question. So once you lose that question, it's kind of all over, right? So it's like a child going to their parents and then one day saying like, oh, my parents made a mistake there. Maybe they always make mistakes, and it's kind of like, oh, shoot, that was a really crucial one. It always happens.
Maybe they decided it was too hot to handle at that moment.
Absolutely, it was too hot to handle. They were correct in saying that. The problem now, though, is that Jesus didn't make it easy on them to crucify him. They wanted him to give them a reason, and he keeps not. Which is like the ultimate slow play. So often people confront us, they want us to confront them back to just give me a reason. And when you don't, it's so frustrating because people are like, oh, so this is going to make me look really bad. I was hoping to fire you from your job because you did something wrong, but instead it's just because I have to be the bad person here. So we can see modern parallels pretty easily to that kind of thing. So we're going to read the next part of the passage, which is 28 to 32. And I'll read this part. I'll volunteer here. Jesus says, what do you think? A man had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, son, go and work in the vineyard today. The son answered, I will not. But later he changed his mind and went. The father went to the second son and said the same, and he answered, I go, sir. But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of the father? They said the first. Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, the tax collectors and prostitutes are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and prostitutes believed him, and even after you saw it, you did not change your minds and believe him. So explain what's happened in our story in general terms.
I'm hoping you'll explain it because I've never understood this.
Never understood. So let's just say right away that neither of these sons is an example we want to follow. Because neither of their deeds match their words. They both lack some sort of integrity, right? So ideally, the one who says, I will go, goes. That's what our ideal is. So we should not strive to be either one of these sons. That's just the first part of the message, is let's not mix it up and think, oh, we're supposed to be the ones that say, no, God, I won't follow you, but then secretly go and follow you. No, that's not what Jesus is saying. So we have two sons and a father. The father asks him to go work. The one says, nope. But then comes to himself and says, yeah, I'm going to go work. And the other son says, I will definitely go and do what you want me to do. And then doesn't actually do what they're supposed to do. Chris.
The first son was honest. He said, I won't go. Second son lies and says, I will. So in my mind, the first son is the most honorable because he was truthful of how he felt. But then he reconsidered and did something good for the father.
So for you, the first son is honest at least, but reconsidered and did good work. Well, the second son is dishonest because he does not go to work.
He's a liar.
He's a liar.
He's a liar.
But what if he had intended to do it, but he changed his mind?
If he had done what the first son did, is that what you're asking?
Because I'm just pointing out, Chris, that because the first son eventually made the right decision, we call him a man of integrity. But both of them actually just changed their minds.
If you're with integrity, I don't think I used
No, you didn't say integrity, but you said that he's favored because he reconsiders and does what the father wants him to do. But the second son, for all we know, had every intent of actually going to work in the field, but he just didn't. For whatever reason, we don't know why.
But you're adding something, in my mind, you're adding something to the first son, that I don't read there.
Okay.
We don't know that the first son internally didn't realize that it wasn't what he should do. Not because it was his father. He maybe had done that to a stranger, but he had some kind of internal conversion that as a person, I should do this, whether it's for my father or not.
Okay. So his decision to eventually go was internal as of his own person, that we don't necessarily know what his motivations were.
Right.
Outside of that. Or no. Anna.
Neither of them were dependable.
Neither of them are dependable. It could be.
They confused the issue.
Right. So I want to make the point here that these two sons on their own are really problematic, unless you understand what they represent. So the son who says, yes, sir, and then doesn't go to work, he represents a certain thing, and it rhymes with dig.
Fig tree.
Fig tree. He's the fig tree. I will go do it. This is my job. I am the son who goes to work. Yes, fig tree, you're the fruit, the plant that bears fruit. Yes, leaders, Pharisees, Sadducees, elders, priests, you're the ones who lead the people. Except you do. You don't. You're not. And the other one, you have him say, no, I'm not going to follow that. But then John comes along and converts him. And he says, huh, I've been a tax collector. I've been a Jew who's been divorced from my people. But this John guy has me rethinking who I am and what I believe. So it's really hard to say who are we in the picture because those we's aren't actually for us. They're already referring to other people. And I want to note that one troublesome interpretation of this passage for centuries has been that the first son, the one who says, I will not, is the Gentiles, who were not God's chosen people but eventually followed God, and the others were the Jews, who were followers but then didn't bear the fruit of believing in Jesus. The problem with that is that Jesus is only preaching to Jews about Jewish people. When he's differentiating the people who are the leaders versus the people who are not in authority, they're both Jewish. He's not talking about Gentiles and Jews. It's unfair to say the Jews are the bad ones and the Gentiles are the good ones, which the Gentile church did for centuries. It's just not in the passage. Especially because we know Jesus is preaching to a Jewish audience, telling them, repent and, come close to the kingdom. The people welcoming Jesus into Jerusalem, they weren't Gentiles. The people following John as the prophet who believed his message, they weren't Gentiles. They were the tax collectors and the prostitutes. Some translations say harlots. I like that word, harlots. But they were the ones you didn't think would be the ones to get it. And that's who this son is the one who figures it out, even though he didn't get it at first, one way or the other. Jimmy.
Seems to me that the religious leaders are simply told that they didn't care enough to do the kind of loving things or the correct things. But then, thinking about political leaders today and like that, maybe it's not that they don't care enough, maybe they have other motivation.
So whether they cared enough, Jesus might be criticizing you didn't care enough, but maybe there's some other motivation. I want to look at the last line. The tax collectors and prostitutes believed him, and even after you saw it, you did not change your minds and believe. So if these people are really authorities, religious authorities, people of God, they would hope that all of the people would come to follow God. John comes and he converts the worst of their people in their minds. Wow, look, John's finally gotten through to them. But we can't believe, we can't endorse that because we would lose our authority. So Jesus is criticizing, saying, you saw the evidence, you saw the fruit, and you still wouldn't endorse it. You still wouldn't put your authority behind it because of what it would mean for you. And all of a sudden, this whole authority, who has the authority, which we've seen throughout this story, it's still in balance because they're saying, oh, Jesus didn't just win the round. And if we concede, he's going to win way more than the round, and we can't have that happen.
So Peterson says he thinks it's more that they don't care enough, even though they know it's. But you're saying at the moment, you're saying that probably it's because of the power balance and like that they don't do anything to change the balance of them. Their motivation is to keep power and wealth and so forth.
So is it because they don't care enough, or is it because of the power balance? I wonder if, Jimmy, if they don't, I think it could be a both and. Because sometimes we care about things. Like, look at our own motivations. Let's just be brutally honest, right? Sometimes we serve people in need, we know are in need, and after we serve them, they're still in need. And we feel good that we helped them along a little bit. But it's different to do something so drastically that now those people and us would be on equal ground, and that maybe we would give half of our wealth to them. This is a ridiculous thing, but maybe we would, so that now we're on equal ground. Ooh, I don't know about that, because now that puts me and all the hard work I've done, it kind of gives it away to somebody. I don't know what the motivations are, so I don't necessarily want to give them equality with me. I don't want to give up my station to elevate them, Because what if they misuse it? So it's not that I don't care, it's that it's really hard to give up authority, but maybe I don't care enough to give up that authority. So it could be a mix, because I think some of us, we really care, but there's still that, like we care enough, but not so much we want to give up all the authority more than we have in the past. Like that's a little bit too much care. And that's caring so much that you cannot know how the person you care for is going to react. Like maybe they're not going to be happy you cared for them. Maybe they're not going to thank you. Maybe they're not going to care back. And yet, that's kind of where Jesus is saying you need to go with things. Because you're not caring for your sake, you're caring for their sake. Which is his whole message, right? God's whole message of redemption and reconciliation and salvation. God doesn't do it for us, God does it for God. That's who God is. It's not because we deserved it. It's not because of any of that kind of thing. It's a free gift of grace from God, which is kind of the bigger picture in all of this. But it goes back to, though, this whole idea about faith and prayer. And that if you want to tap into God's authority, as Jimmy said, I love the words, lay your hands on God, embrace God. If you want to tap into that authority, you can. But it's not going to come from the chief priests and the elders. It's going to come from God. And so that's what Jesus is showing us, that from the bottom up, Jesus is saying, I know my authority is from God, so these people don't have authority over me. And through his actions or through his questions and all those kind of things, he continues to establish that. And then saying this whole part about two people, two sons going into the vineyard, the parable is a little less, it doesn't have the same kind of story to it as a lot of other parables, because oftentimes you see where God is in the parable and you see where we are in the parable. This isn't a parable like that. This parable is just trying to make a judgment of saying, like, better to convert and to follow what is supposed to happen, or follow your Father's will, than to reject it, while still believing that you're actually in good with your Father. Because the question is, does the son who says, I'll go, but then never goes, does he ever even realize how offensive that is to his Father, right? So we don't know. We can only intimate. Yes, Chris.
And since this is tell me if I'm got this correct, but he's on his way to a crucifixion.
Absolutely, he's on his way to crucifixion.
And so, by saying, I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you. He's already giving them a chance before they crucify him of what they need to do to get into heaven or be right with God before they crucify him.
He still hasn't excluded them, Chris. He still hasn't excluded them. He's just telling them, these people are in line in front of you. The last shall be first. And the first shall be last. Maybe you still have time, but this is the challenge before you. Yeah, that kind of thing. So we've kind of hit a lot of these questions. Why would this be shocking to his audience? Our last question. It's pretty obvious why it would be shocking, because they understand that Jesus is basically calling them the son who says we'll go and then doesn't. The Pharisees, when Jesus tries to, let's say, sometimes sarcasm goes over our heads when somebody's sarcastic towards us. Pharisees understood it. Jesus hit his target. They're very, very aware of what he's trying to tell them. They know how bad he just made them look. And then he reinforced it with his story to the crowd. So, big tree stamped on their foreheads, every one of them. So, as we close out the study, the question for reflection, and this isn't one necessarily to share, it's just one to kind of to think about as we go. do your best to imagine a quote unquote perfect, or at least super good. If you know we're not supposed to be perfect, that's good. But super good Christian. What do they look like? How do they act? Where would they live? How do they interact with others? And consider what of that is really window dressing. What would change if true Christians were marked by prayer and faith? And what about that would be uncomfortable if we're honest with ourselves? If you couldn't look at somebody and know that they were a true Christian because their true faith lies within, how does that make it harder? And how is that good? So I leave you that question, those questions. There's not necessarily right answers to those, they're just some things to ponder as we think about word and deed and how the best is when they match up. How we know some people who are very pious in their profession, but maybe not so much in their practice. We know other people who are incredibly good in their practice, but their profession seems to lack altogether. I know some people who do not consider themselves to be Christian, who are models of Christian behavior, if you could say that. You know, it's kind of like, man, they totally get it, except they don't believe the same things I do. And then I know some people who call themselves Christian who I don't have anything in common with when it comes to how we see how we should act in the world. And I think that's at the root of what Jesus is talking about right now. Those are some of the key questions. So, things to ponder. Thank you all for a great study today, and we look forward to continuing. So just some notes about what's going to happen in the weeks to come. We're going to continue to do this as often as we can. Wednesday at 10 a.m. If you're able to come, it'd be great if you could let me know, or whoever sends the email to you to know, just so that we can anticipate, because there is a possibility we could squeeze another couple people by kind of rearranging slightly if we need to. Coming up, so this week we'll be preaching on this particular passage. And then we're going to do a 5-week sermon series on, let's call it the tenets of the Reformation. And these are points of Calvinism that are described in the acronym TULIP. Total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints. These are theological concepts that have come out of the Calvinist tradition, the Reformed Presbyterian type tradition over the years. And we'll be examining the biblical basis for these, and we'll be wrestling with them. Because frankly, not all Calvinists believe in all these points, and Calvin himself never laid out this set of points. Nowhere in any document, nowhere in any set of beliefs is it like, this is what a Calvinist is. This is what it means to be Reformed or Presbyterian, because we're both of the Reformed tradition. This is something that has been kind of a helpful understanding of some main points of this particular brand of Protestantism over the last 500 years. So we'll be looking at that starting next week. So, there we go.
Do you know when we're going to be able to worship in the sanctuary?
So good question, Chris. When will we be able to worship in the sanctuary? The answer is that Consistory is going to look at that in October. It's a lot more complex question than we think, because here are the issues at stake. We can't worship more than like 50 people in the sanctuary. I don't know if that's a number. I'm not just going by the guidelines. I'm just saying we're gonna hold true to what we've established as distancing and masks. Maybe 50 people. I think there's a state guideline on that anyway. We're getting more than that on the lawn. So we figure we'd get that many people inside, maybe, probably. So that means we have to cap it. So what do? Well, we could open up Fellowship Hall, and we could simulcast the service on the screen, and people who didn't get to church early enough can come in here and watch church at church. And somebody last week said, well, we'll just have multiple services. And I said, the problem with that is you have to clean the sanctuary every time. And it's just not feasible, because the people leading the service are now more concerned with cleaning the facility than they are with leading the service at that time. So we would have to turn people away from church, is my concern. So we're gonna figure out what we're gonna do. We probably will, as long as the rates continue where they are, we probably will open the sanctuary back up for worship. But it'll probably be on like a reservation system. It's not ideal, but it's just, we're gonna have to figure that out.
Would you have two services but not the same day? So could there be a Sunday morning?
Have a great day. So, you know what, I'm gonna stop our recording for right now, Chris, but we'll continue the conversation. So.